I'd like to open the meeting at 7:08. The Board of Selectmen were in executive session to discuss contract negotiations, and that's something that we will take up later on in the agenda. So right now, we have, let me put these glasses on. All right, now we have transmitting of the Treasury warrants, number 19B, 20, 20A, 21, and 21A. Is there a motion to accept the Treasury warrants?
So moved.
Is there a motion made by Selectman O'Connell? Second by Selectman Somaglia. All those in favor? Unanimous. We have no minutes this evening, and at 7 o'clock to 7:10, from what I understand, Frank West, is Frank here? All right. I'll give him a second. Frank, you're on the agenda. From what I understand, the Marine himself is going to be running late?
Yes.
All right, then why don't we give him the 10 minutes or so, and another couple of minutes, we, at 7:10, we have an appointment. We'll just go to that if there's no objection from the board.
No,
It's-
Huh? Certainly fine, do your whatever, we'll...
All right, we're going to continue on with the meeting, so what we'll do is at the end of this segment, we'll go back to it. So it's, our next appointment at 7:10 is Jane Delorio's, United States Environmental Protection Agency, update on EPA Superfund investigation of Olin. Is the gentleman here in the audience? Yeah. Hi, how are you? Why don't you take a seat? Yeah, thank you.
With me tonight is Joe Coyne from the Mass Department of Environmental Protection. They're our partner on this project. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to update the Selectmen on this important project, as well as the interested community members. The Olin Chemical Superfund site, to refresh everyone's memory, is a National Priorities List site located on Ames Way. It was added to the federal cleanup program in April of 2006. In July of 2007, we reached an agreement with Olin Corporation and other prior owner-operators to fully delineate the nature and extent of remaining contamination on that property. The property had been subject to numerous actions under the Mass Department of Environmental Protection prior to the 2006 switch over to the EPA federal program. Under the state oversight, numerous removal activities had occurred. Lagoons were removed, and other obvious areas of drums and contamination had been dealt with. Our objective is to determine what remaining contamination exists physically on the property and then extends off the property in various drainage ways, surface water drainage ways, as well as how extensive the groundwater contamination is. So in 2009, we reached an agreement on a work plan for Olin Corporation to conduct the study under the EPA program. The responsible parties are responsible for performing these activities, and it's done with EPA and Mass DEP oversight. So all of the work out there, all of the sampling and data collection is done by Olin Corporation and their contractors. EPA and our contractors oversee that work, as well as a community group called the Wilmington Environmental Restoration Committee, and of course the town. You folks have Geo Insight, who's been following this project closely for several years now. So what I can report at this point is that all of the field work that was required by the 2009 work plan has been completed. Several hundred soil borings were drilled across the property, and from that, several hundred samples have been analyzed now. In the drainage ditches, several dozen samples have been collected from sediment as well as surface water. And then there's a network that existed of over 100 monitoring wells that extends across about a 3/4 mile area, starting from the Olin property on Ames Street and extending as far to the north and west as, say, Mill Road, down to the south to the Burlington town line, and then on the other side coming east down to Industrial and Presidential Way. So it's a fairly extensive network of monitoring wells. Under the work plan, they put in about a dozen new monitoring wells to supplement areas where additional information was needed. So all of those samples have been collected. Many of them were analyzed for more than 200 individual chemicals known to have been related to the former practices at that facility. So some of our initial conclusions are that we do see a lot of what I would call residual soil contamination across the 50-acre property, most of it confined to the 20 acres that comprise the former manufacturing area. And in the surface water and other tributaries that drain from that property, we do see elevated concentrations in sediment. This includes areas of sediment that were previously removed under the DEP program. They've now been recontaminated, primarily because we have areas of groundwater that's contaminated, discharging to those sediment and surface water areas. And then with regard to groundwater, we don't really have a distinct plume of contamination per se. We have what we call these pools where the contamination by nature, its physical nature, is very dense, and the contamination is settled on top of the bedrock topography across the study area. The bedrock is typically 40 or 50 feet below the ground surface. It's shallower in some areas, deeper in others. So we see groundwater contamination basically extending from the property in these pools, but also in the shallower groundwater to up to Mill Road, and then down to the lower end of Chestnut Street. On the east side, we do see it down towards Presidential Way as well. So there's quite a network of contaminated groundwater, and then, of course, under the property itself. An important aspect of the groundwater study was to ensure that there are a number of drinking water wells, potable private wells within the study area. To the south of the property and closest to the property, those wells exist on Cook Avenue. To the north and northwest and west, there are a few private wells on Hillside Way, Chestnut Street, and Mill Road. We have required Olin to basically sample any drinking water well within that broad area that can be located and that the owners agree to allow Olin to sample. And so that's been done. Over 20 private wells have been sampled. 16 or 17 of them have had at least one detection of a chemical called N-nitrosodimethylamine, or NDMA. And it's a very mobile chemical. It basically doesn't stick to anything. It wants to keep moving. And it's also relatively toxic. Now, the concentrations we've seen are what I would call mostly trace levels. There aren't any wells where the concentrations are high enough for EPA to recommend limited or discontinued use of any one well. So the concentrations remain low. We don't see any trend up or down in concentrations. We see some movement, but the concentrations seem to be fairly consistent and fairly persistent. Olin is currently sampling about 16 wells on a quarterly basis. So every 3 months, they go out and sample these wells in the areas I just described to you. Let's see. An important aspect in terms of moving towards cleanup is that we know these dense pools that I described in the sitting on top of bedrock are where the most concentrated contamination exists. And this groundwater is very dense. It doesn't react to normal pumping. So about a year ago, Olin completed the installation of a test well on Jewel Drive, immediately adjacent to their property. And the purpose of this test well is to evaluate the efficacy of physically removing this dense material. That system's been operating for just over a year now. It's pumped out just over 270,000 gallons of this dense material. It's currently pumping at 1 gallon per minute. Next week, they're going to step that up to 2 gallons per minute, which we expect to be basically near the limit of the upper pumping rate. That's one of the main objectives of this pilot, is to find out what the upper pumping rate is. And so that information will be important to design a final cleanup strategy. And so that well has had some operational problems off and on, but is generally functioning well and generally demonstrates to EPA that this dense groundwater can be removed. Once extracted, the groundwater is containerized and shipped off-site for appropriate treatment and disposal elsewhere. So the next steps, moving ahead, Basically, like I said, all the field work's been complete. There are some gaps in those data sets for soil, sediment, surface water, and groundwater. We are looking at those gaps very closely. They've already taken some steps to close them where they were obvious. We need to make sure we cross the Ts and dot the Is on the other data gaps. All of that information gets fed into what we call a human health and ecological risk assessment. So under the Superfund program, we're not held to pre-described cleanup standards. They factor in, but we actually evaluate the potential exposure risk to these chemicals and design cleanup levels based on that. So it's a little different than other environmental programs, and I believe more comprehensive in that way. So those risk assessments are ongoing right now for soil and sediment. They'll be starting for groundwater next year. And I'm anticipating sometime in 2014, we'll be reaching out to the town and the community with a plan to, or several options actually, to remediate the property and perhaps sediment and surface water. I think groundwater is still going to take a bit longer than that. But we are going to be finally talking cleanup, I believe, in 2014, and then probably final cleanup in 15 or so. So we are on a pathway to having a cleanup plan. Once we have cleanup options, they will go out for public review and formal hearing processes and formal comment processes. So that's really the only formal part of this process. The rest of it's very open. So I think that's what I wanted to say, and now I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, Mr. DeLorenzo, I appreciate you being here, giving us an update. It looks like we're making progress, and I noticed there's folks in the audience. Before I go to the folks in the audience, I'm going to go to the membership, and I see some department heads in the audience, and I go to them. Then I would go to the audience. So I start on this side of the table. Is there any questions or comments pertaining to the agenda item that we have in here?
Not for me, unless any questions or comments from the audience. Trigger ready.
Anybody?
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. DiLorenzo. The NDMA, these pools of the dense sediment, is that the DAPL that you've talked about in other? Okay, so you had said that I didn't get the number when you told us. Is that what Olin is running a test pumping? Is that the stuff they're pumping now?
Yeah, they're pumping the dense ground. It's actually dense groundwater.
Okay.
Dense aqueous phase liquid. That's where we come up with the
right.
term DAPL, and that's what the test well is designed to look at. So it's different than pumping regular ground. It's still groundwater, but it's just very dense. It's like a slurry, very viscous, and you can't just pump the heck out of it like you would with regular groundwater.
And how much of it did you say had you taken so far?
270,000.
Yeah, just
270,000 gallons.
Thank you for that. As you remove that, I'm thinking about when you're a kid and you're building a sandcastle and you bring the sand up and then the sand kind of collapses and comes in and fills in the space that you've just removed. As you pump out some of this DAPL, does other DAPL from other areas come in? So are you hopefully pulling in other contaminations from the surrounding region where a boring or a well is being pumped?
Yeah, what you're actually, I think, looking for is kind of like the radius of influence
Sure.
from the well. You know, how big a capture zone do we have? And that's something that this pilot is intended to assess, to try to figure that out. I mean, typically with regular groundwater, you would pump 20, 30 gallons per minute, maybe even higher, and cause this big cone of influence, this big area of influence. With this type of dense material, you just cannot do that. You can't. So it's doing it on a smaller scale. And what we need to figure out is how tightly packed will we need to space these wells sufficiently to have sufficient capture over the pools. Is it every 10 feet? Is it every 50 feet? Every 100 feet? And that's one of the many questions this pilot will help answer.
This is probably, I don't know if there might be a question in here, but just a statement, and this is not directed at you. You just happen to be here while I'm thinking of this. So I guess I've been somewhat frustrated since I got on this board that I've also been very, very impressed with the level of the data that you've come and delivered to us. But the frustration has been that it takes a while to get to the point where we're finally talking about cleanup. And I'll tell you, I'm awfully glad to hear you using those words that in the next calendar year, we're actually going to be looking at a plan for cleanup, because it's the first time I really feel like we're getting that kind of discussion. But I guess the concern I have, and maybe this is the question part, is during this, I don't want to say delay, but during this evaluative process where we determine what the ramifications of the problem are. Is the problem getting worse? That's always been a concern of mine, is the longer it takes, is it getting worse?
Right.
And I don't know if you have an answer for that, but, you know, if you come up with a plan for fixing what we analyze and have data on today, and we don't put the plan in action for another year, do we have to reevaluate the plan because now it's a year worse? So,
Right,
do you
right.
follow the question at all?
No, I absolutely understand the question. I can relate to the frustration. I've been doing Superfund for
Yeah.
23 years. This is not atypical. These projects are all complicated in their own rights. They take years, sometimes decades to figure out, and it's always a challenge when, by the time you get to designing a cleanup plan, you're looking at data that's several years old now. So there's a continual process to update that data, and that'll happen here.
Good.
And so you know, when I say that the data that was required by the work plan's been completed, it has, and believe there's a lot of evaluation of that data and risk assessments that are going on based on that data. But as we move forward, there'll be additional data collection. There's additional data collection going on as we speak in certain areas. So that process will never end in a site like this.
Just quickly add, what you're saying is a really good point, and the difficulty is you don't want to start a remediation prior to knowing a full characterization of, because you may start a cleanup and it may not be all-encompassing enough, and you've already gone down this road, and you may realize that later you're not catching everything. So as frustrating as this is, we want to make sure we're catching everything first before we start to think about a true cleanup.
And you said something that was really important to me, Jim, is that the trace, the terminology I'm looking for, the residual contamination levels that you've captured in some of these wells are not significant enough to warrant EPA to mandate any kind of action. So there's not an impending doom case at this stage of the game. So we have the luxury of being able to do this data analysis and hopefully come to a point where we can do a full cleanup.
That's right, Michael. And I just realized I didn't really answer your question, is it getting worse? And we don't really see it. That's a subjective question, so I'll give you a subjective answer. I mean, we see the NDMA, it's highly mobile, N-nitrosodimethylamine. It doesn't stick to anything, it wants to keep going and going. So we are seeing those trace levels around the edges, up on Mill Road, up on the lower end of Chestnut Street. And the objective of sampling those wells is first and foremost to make sure no one is exposed to unacceptable levels. And we know that's to be the case. We have the data to back that up. We have the data to provide some comfort, I hope, to the affected homeowners to the extent we can. But we don't see a trend going up or down either in those concentrations. So it's hard to say if it's getting quote-unquote worse or not. The soil contamination is pretty stable. The areas closer to where the releases were, those concentrations are in the thousands. So I talk about single digit out on the perimeter. They're in the tens of thousands when you get closer to the Olin property and to these dense aqueous phase pools. And that's where the real problem lies, and that's where the focus of the cleanup will eventually be.
Thank you. I will say, just in closing on my side, I'm very glad to have you both on the case. I've been complimentary and I am complimentary of the collaborative effort between EPA, DEP, the folks from Wilmington at the various boards and the Wilmington. What's your department?
You can just call it work.
Work. Yes, thank you.
Environmental,
I was trying to think of all the words. The work committee, as well as the people from Town Hall. So thank you for that collaboration and in working with our consultant as well. So and for coming here tonight to keep us educated.
Thank you. I'll make a comment before I go to the town manager and to the department heads. I mean, I know one of our greatest natural resources was our own town water. We used to supply not only water for the community here in Wilmington, but we used to sell water to Burlington years ago. Unfortunately, that's not the case today. We're buying water from the MWRA. And I've always had faith in the DEP, and I served on the board for a little period of time, and I did participate in a vote, transfer the power from the DEP to the U.S. government, the EPA. And obviously, because of Superfund sites, more economics, there's more of a budget. And I can honestly say I'm really glad that the U.S. government, our big brother, is involved in this because we really need your support and we need your help. And those are the few comments that I wanted to make. And, I understand there's folks in the audience will go to them, but, I'm just glad to see that, you guys are on top of it. And I've always had faith in the DEP. I know you took a lot of criticism from some individuals, but I always had faith that you guys were doing a good job. And at the end of the day, I think we're going positive. And that's what we have to look. It's going to take time. There's no question. You know, is it going to be ever the way it was? Probably not. But if we can try to go forward, try to make it a little better, obviously, and let those folks know that live in the area that we do care, and obviously people are selling their homes in the area. And there's no question, only chemicals to blame for this. And once again, I'm glad Big Brother's involved, and I have a lot of faith that the U.S. government is definitely going to help us. And I'll go to the town manager now. Thank you.
Just a couple of questions, Jim. One is, in terms of the, area of impact, so to speak, the outer edge of this area, has that expanded or changed significantly over the last few years, or is it, it's obviously, as you've described it, a wide area, but has it remained essentially the same, or is that area of contamination expanding?
Well, the potable wells that we sampled way out on the periphery, which is about 3/4 to almost a mile from the physical property location, having NDMA detections, even at these low, what I'd call trace levels that far out, came as a surprise to EPA, because you got to think three-dimensional too, Jeff. It's not just flat. I mean, these wells that we're talking about that source these homes are several hundred feet deep as well. So not only are you almost a mile out laterally, you're 600-800 feet below ground. So the ability for this compound to travel is surprising. But I will say the concentrations we're seeing are barely detectable, and I mean that in the literal sense. I mean, only a few labs in the country can even see these levels. So I'm confident that it's not reaching out further than that, certainly at any type of concentration that would be potentially harmful to anyone. So I do feel like we've bracketed the problem. Now, did that problem exist years ago? It may have. It's just that no one really had looked that far out years ago. Now that we've looked, it seems to be, defined, and we'll continue to look at it every 3 months and make sure it's not getting quote-unquote worse.
And the other question I had, you mentioned the prospect of being able to focus on the remediation in 2014, or at least coming to some remediation plan. When would you envision the actual work of remediation, the physical work of remediation happening?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the process would involve, the important step for the community is when we put out these options, and it won't be a cleanup plan. There'll be several options presented to the town and to the community, and we want feedback on those options before we select a plan. So then following that, so that process will take several months of public hearings and comments. Once we have a final cleanup plan that goes out to public, we need to negotiate with Olin and the corporations again to perform that cleanup. And so there will be a period of negotiation. When we negotiated the settlement to undertake the study, it took a year. I would expect, that time period again moving forward, maybe a little longer, depending on the complexity of the cleanup and we do need to go through that effort. It's important because the parties that were responsible should pay for the cleanup, not you or I as taxpayers. So that's an important step, and we will take that step, and I do expect them to pay for it. And then there'll be a period of design. So you're talking realistically probably 3 years from the time we have a cleanup plan to the time it's actually implemented in the field. A year to negotiate a settlement, a year to design it, and then conduct it. So 2 to 3 years before it's physically done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I know we have a couple of department heads in the audience. I don't know if they wanted to make a comment before I go to the citizens. All right, right now I'll open it to the citizens. Anybody would like to make a comment, any questions asked? And sir, if you can just mention, I know who you are, Mr. Laporte, but if you can just mention your name and where you live for the record, okay?
Nicholas Laporte, 23 Cook Ave. Yes, the NDMA that was detected in our wells, the poison, How deadly is that? I was just wondering.
Well, it's a relatively toxic chemical. I mean, it does. Well, it's really bad in high enough concentrations. The concentrations we see on Cook Ave are typically single digit to 20, what we
My
call,
understanding that they don't measure the NDMA like they would a regular toxic chemical. I heard it's so bad that they have to measure it in
lower.
trillions.
It's in a parts per trillion.
Yeah.
It's what we call nanograms per liter,
Yeah.
parts per trillion. And so 10 years ago, you couldn't even measure that. Now you can measure it, we can calculate it. There aren't any federal cleanup standards for this particular chemical. But the good news is, I mean, we do have, scientists who look at that data, look at the latest published toxicity information, and evaluate exposure risk. So this NDMA is out there, it's in the environment already, absent what Olin did. It's in parts of the food supply, everyone in this room has had exposure to NDMA somewhere. What we're talking about is the additional exposure, which of course no one wants. Right now, it's very low level. If we had to draw a line in the sand, it would be somewhere around 40, 42 parts per trillion would be kind of where EPA would be able to say, really, maybe you shouldn't be drinking that anymore.
Maybe, that's not really defined, that's not really clear.
Right.
But it's
know.
so bad that Wilmington had to shut down their wells, right? Yeah, it's that bad. Now, why was the residents of Cook Ave left behind?
Well, in the case of the municipal wells, the concentrations that they measured were about, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 160 nanograms per liter. And so, of course, if we saw those types of concentrations on Cook Ave, the same decision would get made. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing, very, very low concentrations.
But a very low concentration of a very deadly chemical is too much, for me, in my own opinion.
Right.
And you were talking about the cleanup. I would suggest that the first thing on the list, maybe even before you even go over a list, should be that the wells be shut down that are subject to these poison, and perhaps, I read in the report that an alternative source of water would be put up the street. The only alternative source would be from a main. I can't think of any other way. So maybe that should be one of the first things.
Right. Yep.
And I would like the selectmen's opinion on that also. I mean, as far as, what's acceptable, you're talking about getting this lot cleaned up for whatever, Olin wants to do with it, make money, sell it, whatever. But meanwhile, the residents are drinking poison. I wondered if that had anything to do with Wilmington's exceptionally high cancer rate among children.
So the Department of Public Health is looking at that
Yeah, the
very
study done
question.
started 2 years before Wilmington shut down those wells, and it hasn't been concluded yet, and that was over a decade ago. Yeah, so I was just wondering if it had anything to do with it, or...
That's the question they're trying to answer.
Mr. LaPointe, I understand your pain and frustration. I don't blame you because you've been dealing with that, but that's why we're having this meeting, and the DEP and the EPA is involved in it, and obviously it's not going to be something that's going to take overnight and cure it all. Unfortunately, what happened has happened, and we'll try to move forward with it, but you do raise a good point, and that's why we're trying to do the best we can, and we're leaving it to the professionals. Geo Insight, everyone's got a good working relationship with the DEP and the EPA, so everyone's working together trying to resolve this and to try to move forward. And I understand your point, and it's well taken, it really is.
I know, and also you mentioned how no economic stress would be put on the town, but there has been by us having to pay for higher water rates through MWRA. So I don't know exactly how that's fair.
Right. That's good.
Mr. Newman?
Well, just as a point of information, our water rates have gone up since we joined MWRA on a permanent part-time basis, so.
But wouldn't we now be having to pay for water rather than be getting it from our clean wells that were clean?
On an emergency basis, but the Wilmington ratepayers have not seen an increase in their water rates since we joined. And a big part of that is because Olin paid for the connection fee,
But they don't pay
which
for
in
the
large
actual
part,
water.
right, but in large part, the connection fee is what drives the premium that communities often pay for MWRA water. because they have to bond that big amount of money.
Thank you, Mr. Laporte. Anybody else? Mr. Lincolnfeld, just state your name and
George.
your address for the record, please.
Yeah, George Lincolnfeld, 11 Concord Street. I'd like to just bring up two questions. We've asked them before. Just refresh my memory, maybe update me a little on two issues that were special to me. It sounds like the pilot test is working, so the fears that you had of pH changes and viscosity changes and oxidation and interfering with the pumping, that's working out, so it doesn't seem to be as big a problem as you might have thought at one time?
At the low rates that they're currently pumping at, as we increase the rate, those types of issues do become problematic, and that's what we're trying to figure out, is what the maximum rate you can pump it at before those issues become overbearing.
Okay, so it's working out great. And then-
It's working now.
Good. Second question, and I think we talked about this before, but to see if there's any changes in the new data. The bedrock, my understanding was, is not as solid as initially thought. It's more porous. In part of this new study, I really haven't been up to date on what's going on. I don't know if there was any updated geophysical work or whatever, and I'm sure you did investigate. Were there any preferential pathways such as fracturing zones, and/or you talked about the trace NDMA out in the periphery? You haven't identified any natural pipeline, so they might pop up a mile or two away in an isolated location or anything.
Right, that's a good question. We haven't figured that out. That is something that's being
You're
looked at.
still working on that one? Okay.
Yeah, the bedrock fracturing is very, especially when you get down several hundred feet like that, it's hard to trace it from the source to the receptor well, and that's what we're trying to figure out, but we may never know the specific preferential pathways. We may never know them all, but we're gonna go as far as we can.
That's one of my fears, that there might actually be a hot spot or upwelling or plume somewhere that we don't know about that's already exists and might be a problem for somebody else. And
Right.
So one of the thoughts that I had was, if perhaps if you have some inkling that that's going on, you might try to throw in some random testing outside of your area, or just I don't know, some statistical random look at it.
Right.
No.
I
No?
think my opinion, George, I would share that concern if the concentrations we were seeing on the periphery were much higher.
Okay.
Given they're barely detectable, the comfort level that anything's happening further out, we're pretty comfortable that just is very unlikely given what we know.
Okay, but there's still a possibility that something, as part of the study wraps up, we could still identify a smoking gun barrel or something.
Yeah,
You don't know that yet.
We're going to be looking very closely at the relationship of bedrock in the area of the known DAPL pools to try to identify preferential pathways like that, and we'll go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lincolnfeld. Anybody else in the audience? Suzanne Sullivan, just...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple things, just to clarify with Jim, for George, and maybe for the board also, that it appears as though the NDMA is actually traveling in bedrock fractures. I don't know if that was actually made clear to people. And one of the reasons why they may be seeing it now is because now that with the wells are shut off, the wells were kind of like the capture zone. And to your point, George, why it may not actually be anything beyond what we're seeing now as it travels out is because the wells were like the capture zone for the contamination. And now that the wells are off, that contamination is now traveling past the wells. And it seems like that may be what's going on. I just wanted to kind of clarify that.
Or in a different direction,
Oh, yeah.
from the bedrock wells that are currently on.
So just to clarify that. Actually had a question for the board. Right now, we've had 2 rounds of grants, two $50,000 rounds for grant money, which actually is funded by Olin, it's not funded by the taxpayer, so that we can hire our consultant and do what we do. One of the things that we have to do under the grant obligation is public outreach. And we actually have a deadline coming up December 1st, and we're trying to develop maybe a better public outreach plan. We've had some meetings in the past, but we had a couple of years where there wasn't a whole lot going on, and we haven't had a public meeting. We tried some Facebook, that didn't work very well. And so my question to the board is, are you satisfied with the information that you get regarding this site? Do you think that EPA could do better communicating with the board and the community? Do you think that maybe we could do better communicating with the board and the community? And maybe if you think we could do better, what any suggestions you might have. I mean, we've thought about, writing letters to the editor. I mean, we've thought about maybe coming in and do more meetings than before. I mean, we're getting to the point now that the more the community participates, the better it is for the cleanup. So I don't know if the board has any thoughts on that, because we're willing to listen to what anybody has to say.
I'll just make a quick comment. In our package that we receive every week, we do get updates, not weekly, but we do get multiple updates relative to the EPA, DEP, but mostly EPA, dealing with the town and our own local Conservation Commission. Any fiscal question about budgets, I defer it to the town manager. However, I think everyone's doing a decent job on it, obviously input from the citizens as well, but I really got to focus a lot on what's going on with these gentlemen over here, because, you're the professionals helping us, guiding us in the right direction, and Geo Insight is doing a good job. So, I mean, we're just moving forward. We know this is an ongoing problem.
And you read it, is it understandable to you? I mean, one of our jobs under the grant is to disseminate information and to help the public understand some of the technical information. So if you get stuff within your packets and you read it, I mean, so the question is, do you really understand it? Would you like us to maybe meet more, or EPA meet more with the board to make it a little bit more understandable?
I personally, myself, I'm not an environmental specialist. I don't know the technical terms as well as you folks do, or these gentlemen that are paid for, and that's their profession, but I do feel that I'm comfortable with the information I'm receiving. If I have any questions, I do pick up the phone and call Jeff, that which I do, and I'm sure the other memberships will do the same. So, I mean, unless, Jeff, you want to make a comment, how do you feel about the situation?
Well, certainly, with EPA updates us on a regular basis. We certainly rely on Geo in terms of analyzing what's presented and either offering comment to EPA as appropriate. I can't say that I have any particular concerns at this point about the information that the town is receiving. I can't really speak for residents in terms of what folks might be looking for.
I go to the membership. Anybody want to make a comment?
Yeah, I'll
Starting
speak.
on this side? Sure.
I'll certainly just speak for myself, obviously. We oftentimes will get reports on activities or borings or well things, and, I'll go through it, and speaking of boring, I'll go through it. It doesn't mean an awful lot to me. I'll look through it and look for anything that, jumps out, but basically go to the last page and look for the summary. Tell me what it really means. And so that's typically what I'm going for, and generally, you're pretty good about including that in the communication. Additionally, the same kind of communication is what we get from Geo Insight. So I feel personally like I get enough frequent or enough notification or communication. It's frequent enough for me, but more importantly, it's written in a way that I can make heads or tails out of, because frankly, a whole bunch of technical data is going to fly right over my head, and I'm not going to be able to make any determinations or judgment from that technical data. In addition to that, this is invaluable to me. Having you come here on whatever is the most appropriate frequency, whether that's every 6 months or once a year, or when there's reportable stuff to have you come, it's really valuable to me to have you come here and be with us or at some of the larger settings. So, I don't know, sorry, Mr. Sullivan, I guess.
No, what you just said was really valuable, actually.
Good, okay. I mean, that to me, that's what I need, and that's what I feel like I'm getting. I don't feel an absence of communication that I would like to have. I feel like I'm getting it from the sources that are the right ones. So that's my opinion there.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. Anybody else?
I certainly would echo some of the comments that have been made. I mean, between the town manager and what we're getting from you, I'd also like to commend Shelley Newhouse. We've been invited to the Board of Health meetings as appropriate as well. And certainly, Suzanne and your group, if there are communications that you feel that you want us to have in our hands and be sure that we get them, I would certainly defer you to the town manager's office to see that information gets into the packet. So I'm willing to listen to anything, read anything, talk about anything, certainly within the proper parameters that I'm obligated to do so. Certainly, this is a very difficult situation for the town. I don't want to be redundant, we all kind of know the evolution of how we've gotten to this point. And certainly, we're all mindful of the fact that we want this to be cleaned up. I'm like many other people, I'd like to see this already been done, but I think that I'm saying it to an audience that we all agree on that one thing, that this is, a terrible set of circumstances that is unfortunate, is going to cost a tremendous amount of money, and someone needs to take responsibility. And I feel that, we're all here wanting to make a change. It's just, time isn't really on our side. But that being the case, I don't want to just sit here and say, I know how you feel, because I don't live in that area and I'm not directly affected. But, as a taxpayer and as a resident here and someone that loves the town just as much as many people that are sitting here, it is a problem. So I think, it's an obvious point, but I feel that, this is the step in the right direction. We're all communicating here tonight, and I just hope that it gets better. But I don't think it's going to happen today, tomorrow, next week, but hopefully over time. Some of the dates that you're talking about, the fact that you're even talking about a cleanup, I mean, that is huge. I'm disappointed in 3 years, no disrespect towards anyone that does this as an occupation. Those timelines, to me, are unacceptable, but I understand the framework that you have to work within, and I'm learning as I go in anything like this. It takes a long time, but to your point, I'm willing to read or listen to anything that your group would like to share. So thank you.
Very good, Judy. The manager would like to make a comment, and I'll continue down.
Yeah, just one point, I guess. It might be helpful to the extent that you have particular either events coming up where you're providing information to just make the town aware of those, in advance to the extent you can. I think that would be helpful, and just...
Because the board, one of the great things about the board is that you guys can take that information and get it to the public. It's a lot harder for us to get the information to the general public. I mean, if it comes to the board and it gets in the paper or people see it on TV, they get the information about what's going on for the site. So that's where the board can actually play like a significant role to keep the public informed, on what's going on with the site.
As Judy said, we all care about the community. We all live here. We put our kids through the public schools, we open businesses, we work in communities, so I'll continue on. Anybody else?
I think it's been said between the audience and the board and the manager.
All right, very good. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to make a comment or ask a question? All right, I see no hands. Gentlemen, really appreciate you being here. It means a lot having you just making sure that the town is moving in a positive direction. I mean, we can't change the past. All we can do is move forward, and it's never going to be like it was. All we can do is try to make it a little better than it is today. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a nice night.
Thank you.
Safe travels. Happy Thanksgiving.
All right. Is Frank West here? Somebody want to open up the door and tell him? Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Check, check.
Frank, you're on. Here you go.
Okay, sorry about that. Good evening, gentlemen. I think we all kind of know each other. I'm Frank West. I'm the Marine Zone Manager for the Toys for Tots program in both Wilmington and Tewksbury. And with me is Art Enos, who is the area coordinator for the Toys for Tots program that basically, between him and one of the Marines, they run Middlesex and Essex County. And I also have my son, Frank West Jr., who's been an instrumental help to us with the Toys for Tots program since he was born, basically. But I think the first thing we'd like to do, if we may, if I know Art has a presentation that he'd like to make to Town Manager Hull, if we may.
Yep. There with it. Thank you, sir.
Very good.
On behalf of the Marine Corps Reserves, first I want to tell everybody, Wilmington is one of our best towns for toy collections. Last year, we took in close to 4,000 toys just out of Wilmington. And that puts you in about second place of all the towns around here. So that's a massive feat, considering that the economy was not the best last year. Obviously, Frank West and his wife have done a tremendous job of getting the businesses around here to hold boxes and everything for us, and we appreciate it, because this year is going to be even tougher. But on behalf of Marine Corps Reserve, I'd like to present a Commander's Award. U.S. Marine Corps Reserve proud to recognize the town of Wilmington for outstanding support of the 2013 Marine Toys for Tots program. Your generous contributions have enabled the Marine Corps to bring the joy of Christmas and send a message of hope to America's less fortunate children. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we also have a small token for the selectmen and town manager, and certainly one for Bev also. Pass those down like that. Little challenge coin.
Thought it was a chip from Vegas night or something.
You can't use those down in Foxwoods.
Hey, the way things are going down, they may accept them.
But, you know, as we've done in the past, I'd like Art, if he can spend a couple of minutes and just briefly tell you a little bit about the Toys for Tots program and how people in the local area can help get toys to the program, and just as importantly, those residents here in Wilmington that are in need of toys, how they can receive toys, and, you know, even if it's not a Wilmington resident, but if they've got a relative that's in the local area, how they can receive toys as well. So if I can...
Pretty much everything we do right now, I've got online. We ask everybody when they are looking for toys to go on the Toys for Tots website. All they have to do is enter into Massachusetts, enter into the town of Wilmington. They'll come right into my home site. I've done this for about 30 years now. Right now, I have already close to 14,000 families already registered from this area. I'm in charge of Middlesex, Essex, which is 88 towns. Altogether, we'll distribute pretty close to 160,000 toys this year. But they can come in on that website. It's very private. They don't have to give an awful lot of information. They simply register with their name, their address. It comes into us. We then have agencies that are doing the distribution for us. We'll refer that person to that agency. We'll give them a date, tell them what time to show up. They'll go there and just collect their toys. They don't have to be embarrassed. They're not going to run into people they know or anything else. The other thing we do is I make sure that their distribution is done in a town next to where they live. In other words, I don't run a distribution in Wilmington per se for the Wilmington needy, simply because it gets embarrassing. So we'll send them to an agency maybe in Burlington or one of the other towns close by, and they can go pick up their toys there. But it's pretty simple for them to get online and just give us a little brief information, and we'll get in touch with them and give them all they need. I also keep the warehouse in Billerica open right up through Christmas morning, so that we catch any people that might have failed to register or at the last minute finally decided that they wanted to reach out for a little bit of help. So, again, I'm in charge of Middlesex, Essex. My name is Art Enos. I have a phone number out there, 781-718-0856. They can reach me 24/7 for any help they need. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just real quick on the local end, first of all, I'd like to apologize for us running late. I know
That was my fault. I was out of Fort Devens.
Art only spends about 90 hours a week doing Toys for Tots, and then he gets some social time, and most of his social time is Toys for Tots this time, too. But again, thank you for allowing us to run late in your agenda. I appreciate that. But basically, on the local end, as far as the collection of toys, once again, Town Hall has stepped up, and we have a box here at Town Hall. And a lot of the local businesses, in both Wilmington and Tewksbury, if you drive along Main Street, Wilmington, into Main Street, Tewksbury, you'll see Toys for Tots boxes all over the place. And so, once again, we're just, asking the town, both from on the Toys for Tots end, we appreciate the past generosity of the town and the appreciation of the Board of Selectmen and certainly the town manager. But again, once again, the need's going to be there, and we're just, basically what we're just trying to do is we're just trying to make it, make it a little bit brighter for the residents, and certainly, here in Wilmington, both we have people that are very generous, And on the flip side, we have people that are in need. So Toys for Tots is a good program that they can, as Art said, it's, pretty much an anonymous program, so it's a nice way that, we can spread a little holiday cheer for the local community. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, or...
Thank you, Mr. West. I'll start on this side. Any comments at all?
Just, again, to thank you folks personally and collectively, everybody who participates in that program, from the folks who administer it down to the residents and the businesses in Wilmington who participate. And I think Mr. Enos captured really part of what Wilmington's all about when you had recognized how successful this town is in collecting toys, and certainly that's attributable to the work that the West family and others do, but it's also attributable to the spirit of Wilmington. So it's nice to be recognized. The town enjoys being recognized, but it's honestly, it's not terribly surprising. So thank you again for the work you do.
Yeah, Mr. Enos, I'd like to thank you, especially this time of year. Obviously, you're spending a lot more time into this program. I personally have been involved with some military families that have taken part and needed some of the toys, and it is an easy transition from getting your stuff, your toys, and then leaving. And it's really neat to see the families on the other side when they are able to get toys for the children. So I'd like to thank you for all the many hours you're working into the program.
Thank you, Lou.
The comments have all been made. Just want to sincerely thank all of you for being here. It's a job well done, and certainly you're making a difference in many lives by what you do, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Enos, very much. And Mr. West, to you and your whole family, Frankie, for spearheading this and bringing it to our attention. I hope that, the press, you're there, and, having you here is great for us. I mean, we get to hear about the program, but hopefully, and more importantly, the rest of the community will glean the information that they need to participate in the Toys for Tots program on either side of it. So hopefully the press will get that word out, and WCTV obviously is putting it out there. I only have one question. We obviously hear an awful lot about Toys for Tots during the holiday season, but are there programs or can individuals maybe that have fallen on hard times, or maybe, God forbid, there's a fire or something else has happened in their life through the rest of the year, can they continue to interact with you if there's a need?
We keep a certain amount of toys that come in late, and we'll keep those for things that happen during the course of the year. A lot of the fires that occur, things of that nature, where children suddenly have lost everything they have. I'm fortunate that we have pods right here in Wilmington, and they are a very, very generous donator of those services to us, and have done that for the last 10 or 12 years. People don't know it, but pods gives a pod to 762 units across the country free for 3 months. Here in this area, because they're in Wilmington, we actually have 30 pods free for 3 months every year. But we keep 2 of those filled with what comes in after the fact, and then we go into those whenever. State police are one of my allies that do an awful lot with me, and I have a coordinator from the state police. So they'll reach out to us all the time with certain needs that they have for families, sometimes even victims of crime, what have you. So all during the year, we do supply it.
Again, thank you.
The other thing, I'm sorry, Mike.
Sure, no, go ahead.
Yeah. The other thing that I want, well, it's actually 2 things. I don't know, Frankie, do you have anything you had to say at all, or? Okay. I mean, just on our end, I mean, Mr. McCoy, Mr. Newhouse, rather, you made a comment that, it's me and my family and all, and I have volunteers that help me out, but what we do is that we put out empty boxes, and somehow, through some strange miracle, they get filled. So, I appreciate the kind words, but, the kind words are the people that actually that put into the box, and that's who we appreciate, because, hey, if I take back an empty box, hopefully, it's not going to make a good Christmas for people. So, we just want to make sure that the boxes, get filled, and we keep Art happy.
Yeah. That's important.
And once again, all the comments have been made, and don't worry, we're running late, no apology. We would wait up till and after midnight for you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Moving right along, our next appointment for 7:30 is Karen Rashes, Principal Assessor, public hearing for the discussion of local property tax policy with reference to classification. Welcome, Madam Principal Assessor. How are you?
Thank you, okay.
Thank you.
Sounds what I do is insignificant compared to the Toys for Tots. Certainly better than a more fun job than what we have to to discuss. So I think probably the easiest way to proceed with this is I had given a packet to the manager for you. So perhaps we could, if I could guide you through some of that and answer questions,
Absolutely.
if that's okay?
Go right ahead. Thank you.
So this evening, we're here to, in accordance with the Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 56, to present information to the Board of Selectmen so that you can vote a residential factor. And in adopting a residential factor this evening, it governs the percentage of the tax levy to be allocated and paid by the residential and commercial taxpayers. So after careful review and analysis by the Board of Assessors, we recommend to the Selectmen a classification shift of 175%, which is in accordance with what you've traditionally done, and that would be a vote of a residential factor of 0.754347 for fiscal year 14. The assessed values this year that were established were based on calendar year 2012 sales information with an assessment date as of January 1, 2013. So if we could look at the second page in the packet, which was a comparison of assessed values from fiscal year 13 to 14, as you'll see that the residential values for fiscal year 14 are $2,654,197.31. And that's an increase of $84 million. And it would show as a percentage change of 3.29%. But I want to point out that the residential class consists of not only just single family, but also of apartment buildings, vacant land, 2 and 3 families. So we did have roughly $31 million in new value because of new growth in that class. Your commercial class is $145,965,075, which is a slight increase. The industrial class being at $631,102,662. There's a slight decrease there of $19 million. That's roughly due to some abatements of some properties that needed to be addressed. It's not necessarily a global decrease across that class, but there were more specific pockets and specific properties that needed to be addressed. And $19 million in comparison to $631 million wasn't really that significant. Our personal property class increased around 4.8% to $92,282,260. If we go to the third page, the tax levy for this year that was approved and voted was $66,521,619. If you notice down below in the chart, it shows the residential values, commercial, industrial, and personal property, and what their percentage share is of the total. So before we shift, the residential share makes up roughly 75% of the property value in Wilmington, and the commercial value, commercial, industrial, and personal makes up about 24%. That's slightly up from last year when it was a little bit different percentages. But if you were to shift to 175% as you have in the past, that would change that the residential share of the tax levy would go from 75% down to 56.82%. And the commercial, industrial, personal property, rather than paying 24.67%, they would be picking up 43.17% of the tax levy. That would be at the 175% maximum shift that you would have done in the past. The percentage shares haven't changed that much traditionally from what you've been, except this year there was a slight increase over fiscal year 13 in the residential category of 1.5%. The next page, which is the colored page, What this does is it shows you the tax classification, if you were to change percentages from not classifying to classifying. So the first line across the top would show you, if you did not choose to vote a residential shift this evening, the tax rate would be $18.88, which your average residential bill would then go up $2,000. Meanwhile, your commercial bill would decrease by $8,700. If you voted a shift of 150%, the residential tax rate would be $15.79, resulting in a $901 increase to the residents and a $2,200 decrease to commercial. And you can see as the chart, I did 160 and 170%, but if you chose to do the 175, which is what you've traditionally done, the residential tax rate would be $14.24 and the commercial tax rate would be $13.04, which would result in a $345 residential increase and a $163 commercial increase. And that's on an average bill. So obviously, above or below that number would change. The commercial value that we use to calculate the average, it's kind of difficult to come up with an average commercial where you have multi-million-dollar properties and you have little mom-and-pop stores, but we purely just took the total value divided by the parcel count to get that average and then compare it to last year's. The next page is just a quick analysis to give you some history of the levy changes, the tax bill changes, and the average assessed value changes. What I'd point your attention to is in 2007, you can see under the average assessed value column that we kind of peaked with our highest property value being around $401,000 and then up to $402,698 in 2008. And you can see as the economy had changed and the market changed, how the values had decreased. And with our significant decrease between 2009 to 2010, it went from 381 down to 356. It stayed in the 350 range until last year, which was a revaluation year, and it went down to 349. This year, the analysis showed that we've kind of seen a little bit of an uptick, that things have stabilized, and we had a great spring, actually. So the average assessed value has now at $358,277. It's a small increase. We're still not back to where we were in 2008, but it was more of a positive increase. And the last page just was a snapshot to show you what traditionally percentage that the residential and commercial class have made up valuation-wise on the left-hand columns, and when you shifted what their tax levy share was on the right-hand side. You can see in 2004, you were able to shift up to 200% of the levy as opposed to the 175, and that was because there was special legislation that was passed. The residential values were increasing at a higher rate than commercial industrial. So in order to be able to shift more of the burden, the legislature changed the percentage and then ratcheted it back down to the 175 in effort to give the market time to catch up on the industrial class. So you've shifted the max throughout since 2002. If you were to do that again this year, your residential factor would be 0.754347 at a shift of 175%. And that would also result in an excess levy capacity of $2,529. So is there any questions?
Just before I go to the board, I'll make a quick comment. I served on the board in 2004, and the manager said, I did talk to the manager pertaining to this, and I did vote to support the maximum shift. Mitt Romney was governor at the time, I remember, and we had to postpone, Mike Carr was the town manager, we had to postpone the meeting or the actual vote and allowing the max. And I want residents to realize, with us doing that, maximum shift, it was special legislation, you'd be paying about $2,000 more per year today on your property tax if we did not vote that. Unfortunately, I wear two hats. I own a business and as a resident. So I've always voted, unfortunately, to tax shift the maximum to the commercial, which is obviously positive to the residential. And I'm going to continue to do that this evening. But I thought that would be worth noting where you mentioned in that, so I just wanted to put that out there. And any questions or comments from the board? And I'll start on this side of the table, Mr. Shampoo.
I don't really have questions per se. To me, this each year makes more sense to me as we go through it. To me, I think this chart here shows it, where it really levels the playing field. We want to strike a balance between having a really welcoming environment for residents to come and set up and build their family and their home here, but also for businesses to come and establish themselves. It's obviously a very attractive location for businesses to locate and to have employees live here. So, it's trying to find and strike that balance, and this shift at 1.75 really does level the playing field. I'm trying to find the chart that says it here, but it was 56.45, I think it was, or what was the number?
It's 56.8230. It's on this chart with the levy.
Yeah, I thought I had it there.
Yep, on the right-hand column.
Yeah, all right, so thank you, right. So, 56 to the residents, and what's the...
It's actually 43.177 to the commercial.
As opposed to what, 75-25 if we had effectively gone with no shift. So, it's sharing the burden equitably. I support the shift, and I appreciate you going through the exercise of defining all of these terms for us. It helps me feel comfortable in justifying the vote to accept it, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. Anybody else?
I don't have any comments, thanks.
Anybody down here at all?
Mike said it all, thanks.
Mike, all set?
Yeah, I just think one thing that bears reinforcement and repeating is that the essence of this vote tonight is to maximize the extent to which we can tax the commercial, industrial, and personal property tax base for the benefit of the residential taxpayers. And if we maintain that focus, that it just makes eminent sense to do it, I think.
Thank you. The only comment I'll make is that I really believe the residents in the town get a good bang for their buck. If you really take a look at it, free bus transportation, free trash pickup, free kindergarten. I mean, we do it all in this community. And in other communities that are so-called richer than the town of Wilmington, not only do they pay more property tax, they're paying all these user fees. And that's really significant. That really speaks the volumes that what this town is doing. And as sad as it is, nobody wants to pay any more money in taxes, but that's how life is. And under the governing of Prop 2.5, that we're able to do this. But we absolutely get a great bang for our buck in this community. We do great snow plowing. I mean, I think the board has done an outstanding job here, directing the town manager, and, I mean, Wilmington is a really nice place to live, and I just think those are worth noting, and I, too, like Mr. Newhouse, I am going to vote for the maximum tax shift, putting more of a burden, unfortunately, saying that way to the commercial aspect of it, but once again, the residents, we're trying to do the best we can for our residents, because we live in this community as well, and I don't see too many businesses vacating the town of Wilmington, because we're either blessed or cursed with 4 entrance and exits here off I-93. Outside of Boston, all the way to New Hampshire, what other community or city has 4 entrance and exits off I-93? Wilmington is a desirable place to live, and it's obviously a great place to run a business. I know, it's a great community, and I just thought I'd share that. Unfortunately, I'm going to be zipping the commercial a little bit, but, we've got to take care of our residents in town, right? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. Thank you.
I do also have a form for you.
sorry, ma'am.
I also do have a form for you to sign that needs to be submitted along with our tax rate after you take your vote.
I'm going to be taking a vote, so if there's any questions, comments from the audience, I just say, all right, go ahead, Mr. Lincolnfelter.
George Lee from 11 Concord Street. I don't think it's the right question at the right time, but I raised it a couple of years ago, and I know you're talking tax shift tonight. Whereas we have a $14 million surplus at the moment, I know, is any consideration been to not increasing the tax 2.5%? Increasing it something less? That's a different topic than tonight, or?
No, I think we've talked about that before. The bottom line is using those funds free cash. As you know, we went to a town meeting. I don't know if you were in favor of it or against it, but we purchased property, and I think it's a wise decision that we have this money in this bank, and we're just looking for the future of our town. And I don't think it's going to make a significant dent if we took that $14 million and gave it back to the taxpayers. Those monies are well kept. It's a great resource to have, and I think it'd be foolish for us to give it back. We need this for emergency funds, and we bought some property. We've never been able to buy this property. We're one of these communities that free bus transportation, free trash, and we're buying property without asking the voters for an extra nickel. Where else can you get that in this Commonwealth? I don't think anywhere else. I think we've done a great job here in the town. And the town manager's done a good job, and this Board of Selectmen has given the town manager great direction, fiscal conservatism. That's it, and we've done a great job.
If I can just add, the number now is a little over $12 million after the purchase of the St. Dorothy's property. But, this, for all intents and purposes, is a municipal business, $90 million business. And as any business or any family, I presume, does, you put money aside for unanticipated circumstances, whether it's the loss of a job or a downturn in the economy. So certainly to have, in the financial institutions, suggest that communities have approximately 10% of their operating funds as a reserve. If you take the 10% of our operating budget, that's about $9 million. The other thing that the town needs to really begin to address in a more consistent way is some of our liabilities. An issue that has been talked about now for a number of years and is becoming more of a focus for cities and towns is our liability for the health insurance benefits of retirees. It's called OPEB. And we're required to do audits every 3 years to assess that liability. The town's liability as of 3 years ago was $136 million. The lending institutions and the rating agencies are expecting that cities and towns put money aside for that purpose to offset that liability. So I'm anticipating going forward that some of that money is going to be used to do just that. So I think it's extremely appropriate that we maintain that amount of money. I know it sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but when you're talking about a $90 million operation, I think it's a reasonable number to have.
Thank you. All right, before the board is there a motion to adopt a tax classification shift of 1.75 as recommended by the Board of Assessors, which result in a minimum residential factor of .754347 for fiscal year 2014? Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Motion made by Selectman Newhouse, second. Motion made by Selectman Newhouse, second by Selectman Semaglia. All those in favor? The vote is unanimous. Thank you, Madam Assessor, and have a nice night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll leave this with you.
You're doing a good job. Thank you. Appreciate that. Super. Okay. Thank you.
So, looks like they're over here, I guess.
Do you want us to, while we're signing this, Jeff, do you want to pick up some communications?
Yes, we have communications from Xfinity. This is directed to the board as part of the Comcast's ongoing commitment to broadband network reliability and our effort to better serve municipal customers. I am writing to remind you of our emergency reporting procedures for certain outside plant and service problems. In the event any municipal building experiences problems with downed cable drops, signal transport issues with the iNet or video return lines, public education or government access channels, or to have any technical construction staff on site during an emergency, please call the following number, and they provide a 1-800 number to the town. Then we have correspondence from Verizon. And they're noting some program changes effective after December 2nd. The following changes will be made to FiOS TV. Encore Drama on channels 358 and 359 will become Encore Black, featuring movies and popular TV series. Encore Love on channel 352 and 353 will become Encore Classic, featuring iconic movie titles and classic TV series. On or after December 31, Channel 143 will be removed from the FiOS channel lineup as the content provider will discontinue. The following program changes apply only to the WWE Classic on-demand package subscribers. On or after January 31, 2014, the content providers will no longer make WWE Classics on-demand programming available. We also have correspondence a request from Jo Marie O'Mahony from Women of Wilmington to place signs on the town common for their Festival of Trees.
Is there a motion?
Be happy to offer one just real quickly. I'm assuming because we have nothing in the package which indicates there's a problem in terms of the school build-out and all that stuff. No worries, no safety issues?
No.
Okay.
No.
Sure.
Mr. Nellis, really quick, related to that sort of, I think the Festival of Trees that evening it coincides with what is planned for the tree lighting on
Tree
the
lighting,
common.
yeah.
So
That's
these
right.
signs that they anticipate placing, do you know if they've had any dialogue with the 4th of July committee that runs the tree lighting? I just don't want people the signs getting in the way of folks that are maybe moving around on the common.
I don't know that they have. I know that this has been a standard practice here in the last few years, but the last couple anyways.
Yeah, it has. I have no objection to it. I wanted to raise it to their awareness, just so that there's consideration of it, is all.
Okay, thank you.
To grant the request.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second, motion made by Selectman Newhouse, second by Selectman O'Connell. All those in favor? And it's unanimous. Thank you.
Under Board to consider, this would be execution of a side letter agreement regarding the general foreman reclassification for the ASME 2, as part of the ASME 2 contract. As you may recall, I reported back in August plans to essentially utilize the opportunity of Don Onisite's retirement to restructure the Department of Public Works. Historically, it's been the Department of Public Works, and then separate has been a water and sewer department. They've certainly worked cooperatively and more cooperatively in the last many years, but I think the final element of that transition was bringing water and sewer under one roof, so to speak. And we've done that. As you know, Mike Woods is the Public Works Director. He assumed that position on November 16th, I think it was 16th or 18th. And part of the realignment also impacts the general foreman position. The general foreman has been a position within the Department of Public Works for a number of years, supervises the foreman for the individual divisions within Public Works. With this consolidation, that individual, that position, will be supervising a larger number of employees. And so with those additional responsibilities, Mike and I felt that it would be advisable and appropriate to address that in terms of their the salary that goes with that position. The general foreman currently is a G7. What is proposed and what has been agreed to, at least preliminarily with the union, is to create a G8 position, or G8 classification, which would be a classification above the G7 category. And so the side letter that was entered into requires the board's approval to authorize the creation of this class, and then pay that position in a commensurate way.
All right, thank you. Is there a motion to that effect as described by the town manager?
So moved.
Motion made by Selectman Somaglia. Is there a second?
Happy to second it. And I know that the manager had provided us a written request for a motion. Given that explanation, does that do the trick for you, Jeff, if we...
Or I could read my motion. I move to authorize the town manager to enter into a side letter. Is that the right one I'm reading? Yeah.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Collective bargaining agreement with the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, Local 1703, Unit 2, relative to creation of a G8 classification in the classification plan and to move the general foreman position from a G7 classification to a newly created G8 classification.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Motion made and second. Is all in favor? The vote is unanimous. Thank you. All right, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right.
The board, for board to consider executing closing documents relative to the purchase of St. Dorothy's property. As you know, since the passage of the article at the special town meeting, I've been in communication with Lou Ross from Town Council's office, and he has been preparing for the closing process. The closing is slated to occur tomorrow. That's the expectation, pending acceptance of documents at the land court. One of the requirements of that closing is that the board sign off on two particular documents, one being the settlement statement, and then the second being the deed. Just by way of information, in terms of the settlement statement, seller's charges $1,725,000 is the total amount. We had on a deposit with the church, $50,000, $225 in recording fees, for a total buyer's credit of $50,450. So the net amount, so to speak, that remains to be paid would be $1,674,550. So the board is asked to consider a vote to authorize signatures on those documents.
Is there a motion to that effect? Somebody wants to read that?
I'll do it. I move that the 6 parcels of land located at 120 Main Street be purchased from the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Boston for $1,725,000, that the deed from the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Boston for such parcels with restrictions be accepted, and that the documents to close on such purchase be executed.
Is there a second?
Second?
Second. Motion made by Selectman O'Connell, second by Selectman Champoux. All those in favor? And it's unanimous. Thank you.
Next, under board to consider, this would be execution of the collective bargaining agreement between the town of Wilmington and the International Association of Firefighters, Local 1370. As you know, I've been in negotiations with the firefighters union for quite some time now. I think we initiated the discussions back in March of 2012. We've reached a tentative agreement. The firefighters union took a vote a couple of weeks ago and approved of the proposal. I think it's a reasonable proposal for all sides, and at this point I would recommend that the board authorize the bargaining agreement.
This very part of the agenda was the very reason why we were in executive session at 6:30. Just thought I'd make that public. Is there a motion to the effect?
I move to execute the collective bargaining agreement between the town and the International Association of Firefighters Local 1370 for the period of July 1, 2012 through June 30, 2015, as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Newhouse. Is there a second? Second by Selectman Somaglia. Motion made by Selectman Newhouse, second by Selectman Somaglia. All those in favor? And it's unanimous. Thank you. All right. Moving right along as we're signing us. Public comments. No public comments this evening. All right, how about new business and committee reports? And I'll start on this side of the table with Mr. Champoux. Thank
Just
you.
very brief comments tonight. I just want to pay compliments to all of our neighbors and friends who came to the special town meeting. Was it last Wednesday? I thought, geez, it's Wednesday at 7 o'clock. We might have a hard time getting that room full. And we started right on time with a full contingent of members of the community who all had their voices heard and participated in the democratic process. And allowed us to sign these documents tonight to purchase the property at the St. Dorothy's site. So kudos to all of you that showed up and had your voice heard. Thank you very much for participating in that process. I look forward to seeing you out on Town Common on the tree lighting and various other holiday events, and happy Thanksgiving to you, my colleagues, and everyone else in town. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo.
Nothing this evening, thank
Judy,
you.
all set, thank you. Anybody on this side of the table?
Just have a happy Thanksgiving.
Nothing other than happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving. All right, very well. All right, Jeff, want to bring us to important dates as we sign the documents again? Thank you.
Important dates, we have through the end of the month, the yard waste collection, the brush drop-off is occurring on Old Main Street, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. on November 27th. November 28th, Thanksgiving Day, the town offices will be closed. November 30th, we have a brush drop-off at Old Main Street, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Again, on December 4th, brush drop-off, Old Main Street, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. December 5th, Santa's Workshop, Town Hall, 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m.
All right, thank you. Before
Actually,
I'm sorry,
just a
go ahead.
few more here,
I
don't
thought
want to
you
miss this one.
hesitated for a second, that's why I thought we were over.
December 7th is the breakfast for Santa, so we want to make sure we mention that one. December 7th, also, Christmas tree lighting is at the Town Common. Also on December 7th, a brush drop-off Old Main Street, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. December 8th, holiday social, Harnden Tavern, 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. And then Board of Selectmen's next meeting is December 16th at 7 p.m.
Thank you. Before I ask for a motion to adjourn, we did not say, go Wildcats, let's beat those red men.
That's right.
All right?
That's right.
We have to
Go
make it
Cats.
said. And we'll put on red here if they win. How's that, okay?
No.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved, second. All those in favor? Aye. Aye, thank you.